Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining this session. My name is Brigit Murtaugh, and I'm a program manager on the Visual Studio Code team. Today, we're going to take a look at the awesome world of development containers. So let's go ahead and dive in. So what is a dev container? A dev container lets you use a container as a consistent, full-featured development environment, both locally and in the cloud. You can reference an image, a Docker file, or an orchestrator configuration file, like Docker Compose. Dev containers have been supported in Visual Studio Code and GitHub Codespaces for several years now. And as containerization and containerizing workloads has become more popular, we've realized that more scenarios have emerged. So we wanted to ask ourselves, how can we support those? And how can we support users even beyond those in VS Code or Codespaces? And thus, the Dev Containers Specification was born. We want to open up dev containers that folks can use them in other editors, and they can even use them in other scenarios beyond development environments, so like CI/CD and test automation. Our goal with Dev Container Specification is to augment existing formats rather than replacing them. And we're open to new formats too, and what the community may be interested in. I've linked their github.com/devcontainers, which is where all the repos related to this effort are living, and as we create new ones, they'll live in that org. A really great part of dev containers to highlight, and part of the specification that we're actively working on, is dev container features. So features are self-contained units of installation code, and they're designed to sit atop a wide variety of base container images. We do have a set of features available as part of the spec that we're maintaining, so you can find that at devcontainer/features on GitHub, and anyone can create and distribute features as OCI artifacts. So now that we've gotten a quick rundown of what dev containers are and the specification, let's go ahead and see what they look like in action with some demos. All right, so let's kickstart things in VS Code Insiders with the origin of dev container support, which is the remote containers extension. And this extension allows us to go ahead and use development containers directly in our editor. So let's see what some of the commands are. So I can click on this, and I can go ahead and explore some of the commands that we have here. So we have a variety of options, but I think a great one to start out with would be looking at a sample. So we've built in some container samples that you can take a look at, and they're going to be for a variety of different languages. So let's say I want to go ahead and take a look at a Python dev container sample. We're going to see that VS Code reloads. It's going to say in the lower left that it's connecting to my dev container, it's opening that remote, and it's going to run the different steps necessary to get that container up and running. All right, so now our dev container is up and running, and let's see what it looks like. We have our container configuration files in this .devcontainer folder. And so that's what the remote containers extension, for instance, reads in order to launch and connect our container. So we have the standard Docker file, which, for instance, we can reference an image for how we want our container to be built or what we want it to be based on. So here we have it built on a Python image since we have a Python application. We also have a dev container JSON, and this is that file that is part of the specification. It's a metadata format that we can put in some other information about our containerized environment. So I close the terminal so we can see a little bit more. We can see, for instance, we can give our dev container a name. And so this is the name that now is appearing in the lower left here of VS Code. We can see how we want to reference to build our dev container. So we're referencing that Docker file over there. And we can even customize our environment even more. So for instance, we can set up some VS Code specific settings to ensure that we can run Python properly, and even set up specific VS Code extensions that we want automatically installed. So let's see if we can actually run this application. I'm going to open up a terminal here in VS Code, and I just want to make sure that Python installed properly because this is a Python application. So I can say python -- version. Cool, we got Python 3.9, which is the version that was designated in our configuration. And so to now actually go ahead and run our app, let's go over to the run and debug. Let's just select this option here. And so we're going to be able to fully run our app from the dev container. And it's cool too because it's going to take care of things like port forwarding for us. So if there are any ports that we need to access, they're going to automatically be forwarded properly. So we can see we have our application running. So let's go ahead and open it. I'll follow link. And this is going to open up our browser, and let's see our app in action. So VS Code can do that? Yes, it can. We can develop through this development container. So we just got a great intro to dev containers, but what if I don't want to install Docker locally? Or what if I want more compute? Or what if I even just have a current application that I'm working on and I don't want to just use a sample like we saw? We can definitely do all of that. So let's go ahead and see that. And in order to demo it, I'm going to take a look at GitHub Codespaces. So I can go over to a repo that I've been working on. So let's go ahead and select this Python application. And it's the cat said no. Looks like there's going to be some sort of button involved. I'm excited. So let's go ahead and create a code space on it. I can use the code dropdown, and I can either use an existing code space or go ahead and create a new one. I'll create a new one, and I can choose what branch I would want to create it on as well. And now our code space is going to go ahead and get set up. And we'll see in these initial logs that it says it built a container. And this app, if you'd seen it quickly when I went through it there, it didn't yet have that .dev container folder. But Codespaces is great because even if you don't have a custom dev container, it's going to use something known as the kitchen sink image. So by default, it'll include a lot of different languages and tools like Python and Java that you may need to run your applications. And then if you want something a little bit more specific, you can go ahead and create a custom dev container, just like we did locally in the containers extension VS Code. All right, so we have our application open, and it does have that kitchen sink or default image like it mentions here. But what if I wanted to go ahead and add a dev container to it? I could manually create the folder .dev container and add the dev container JSON and the Docker file. Or I can use these really nifty built-in commands that are present both in remote containers and GitHub Codespaces. So I'll click on the Codespaces icon here, and I'm going to see that there's a few options. And the one I want to click on is Add Dev Container Configuration Files. So it's going to detect what kind of app I'm working on. So I'm working on a Python app. This seems like a good configuration to add. And I could even choose the specific version of Python I want. I'll just go ahead with the default one. And then maybe I'd want Node in my application. I don't think I do, but I could select a version if I wanted it. And then we'll see we have this checkbox, and this is the same UI that we saw in those slides earlier. So this is where I'm able to add dev container features. So let's say I think I might want to use the Azure CLI at some point. I'll say okay. And we're going to see that Codespaces notified us there was a change in our configuration, so we should go ahead and rebuild our environment. But before we do that, let's just take a quick look at our dev container JSON. We can see it chose Python 3 like we selected and the variant we wanted. We can see that we still have those customizations there, so a ton of content was already built out for us. So to see this in action and run our application, let's go ahead and rebuild our container. But before we do that, we probably want to go ahead and uncomment this post create command. So this command lets us run other commands after the container is created. And so for instance, it gives us an example here to install the requirements.txt, which is common in Python development. Let's uncomment it, and I'm going to make it a little bit different based on what I know the right command to be for this app. And luckily, I already have that on my clipboard, so I'm just going to go ahead and replace this with the command that I want. Cool, I will save that, and now we can go ahead and rebuild. So let's rebuild our container. Okay, so here we are in our rebuilt code space. So I'm gonna say Flask run. We'll see it's running at this port, and Codespaces also takes care of that port forwarding for us. So I'll say open in browser. And I can press the button, and there's that cat paw. So the cat saying no, or the cat saying node. We just saw dev containers both in the remote containers extension and in GitHub Codespaces. And as I mentioned earlier in the slides, we found that dev containers were useful for scenarios just beyond these. So for instance, in other kinds of editors, or even in other kinds of workflows. So I was developing certain projects here, but what if I wanted to have a consistent environment from development to CI/CD and testing to deployment, so I could have a consistent containerized environment at all of those steps. That's where the Dev Containers Specification comes into play. A great hub for a lot of information about the Dev Container Spec is on our convenient containers.dev website. So you'll be able to see an overview about what are dev containers and where do you use them, and actual content in the specification, including information about the spec itself, the dev container JSON schema, features and their distribution, and all those kinds of things as well. And so we do see here there's a mention of a reference implementation, and that is our dev container CLI. And so there's a CLI backing the remote containers extension and GitHub Codespaces, and we've now made that same CLI available as a reference implementation for the specification. So if I go over to dev containers/CLI, we'll be able to see the actual code of that CLI and maybe how we can go ahead and use it. All right, so let's go ahead and install the CLI, and it's just an npm package, so we can install it through npm install. And now let's go ahead and explore its commands. So I always like doing a help whenever I install something new. And we're gonna see there's variety here. So let's go ahead and try building a dev container image and pushing it to a registry. So I'll try pushing it to Docker Hub. Again, I'll conveniently have a command already on my clipboard, but as I paste it in, we'll see that I'm saying that I want to build, so I want to build an image, and I want to build an image from that same repo we were looking at before, that test Python repo. And I'm saying that I do want to push it, and this is where I want to push it. I want to push it to Docker Hub under this image, and I could tag it as whatever I wanted. So I can tag it as latest or something else. So we'll see it goes through the steps of building and pushing this image. All right, and now once we get that successful outcome message, we could go ahead and check it out on Docker Hub. So open it up here, give it a refresh, and we'll see that the latest push was a few seconds ago. And now I can actually go ahead and reference what we call a pre-built image, so this pre-built image, in any of my projects. So that way it saves the build time on future ones, since all those dependencies were actually already built into the image. And it's a great way that I can reuse my setup, and other folks could also go ahead and reference this image and reuse my setup too. And now we're super excited about the dev container spec, and there are just so many things that we're working on, and proposals and repos and all those kinds of things. And so you can learn more in the paper that'll be submitted with this talk, and a couple of other repos to check out could include dev container/features to see that set of features that we're automatically including with the spec. You can look at the feature-template, which is a great repo as a starting point if you want to create and publish your own templates. It includes a GitHub action for publishing, which is really helpful. And you could also take a look at dev containers/CI. This includes both a GitHub action and a Azure DevOps task to help you if you want to reuse dev containers in your CI pipelines. But we really recommend going ahead and checking out that containers.dev site and all the different repos in our dev containers org, because there are so many really cool ones. And finally, we've compiled this slide here with a few other action items, such as how you could adopt dev containers in your projects and docs and things to check out with the specification. I've included an AKMS link there to our documentation on the VS Code side if you're curious more about remote containers, and even some info about GitHub Codespaces. Tells you how you can use dev containers in other setups too, like even via SSH, since we have a remote SSH extension in VS Code. So thank you so much for your time, and we're so excited to hear your feedback and see how you use dev containers. And as always, happy coding.